Just now, somewhere in the universe, a star exploded. There goes another one. In fact, a supernova occurs every second or so in the observable universe, and there is one on average every 25 to 50 years in a galaxy the size and age of the Milky Way. Yet we've never actually been able to watch one happen from its first violent moments. Of course, how would we? There are hundreds of billions of stars close enough that we could watch the supernova explosion break through the surface of the star. But we have to have our best telescopes focused on the right one at precisely the right time to get meaningful data. Suffice it to say, the odds of that happening are astronomically low. But what if we could anticipate a supernova before its light reached us? That would seem impossible. After all, nothing travels faster than the speed of light, right? As far as we know, yes. But in a race, fast doesn't matter if you take a detour while someone else beelines it for the finish line. For exactly that reason, photons don't win the supernova race to Earth. Neutrinos do. Here's why. There are two types of supernovae. Type 1 is when a star accumulates so much matter from a neighboring star that a runaway nuclear reaction. In Type 2, the star runs out of nuclear fuel, so the gravitational... Here's why. There are two types of supernova. Type 1 is when a star accumulates so much matter from a neighboring star that a runaway nuclear reaction ignites and causes it to explode. In Type 2, the star runs out of fuel, so the gravitational forces overwhelm the quantum Fermi forces, pushing out, and the stellar core collapses under its own weight in a hundredth of a second. While the outer reaches of the star are unaffected by the collapsed core, the inner edges accelerate through the void, smash into the core, and rebound to launch the explosion. In both of these scenarios, the star expels an unparalleled amount of energy, as well as a great deal of matter. In fact, all atoms heavier than nickel, including elements like gold and silver, only form in supernova reactions. In Type 2 supernova, about 1% of the energy consists of photons, which we know of as light, while 99% radiates out as neutrinos, the elementary particles that are known for rarely interacting with anything. Starting from the center of the star, the exploding matter takes tens of minutes or even hours, or, in rare cases, several days, and break through the surface of the star. However, thanks to their non-interactivity, take a much more direct effect. By the time there is any visible change in the star's surface, the neutrinos typically have a several-hour head start over the photons. That's why astronomers and physicists have been able to set up a project called SNOOS, the Supernova Earthly Warning System. When detectors around the world pick up bursts of neutrinos, they send messages to a central computer in New York. If multiple detectors receive similar signals within 10 seconds, SNOOS will trigger an alert warning that a supernova is imminent. Aided by some distance and direction information from the neutrino detectors, the amateur astronomers and scientists alike will scan the skies and share information to quickly identify the new galactic supernova and turn the world's major telescopes in their direction. The last supernova that sent detectable neutrinos to Earth was in 1987, on the edge of the Tarantula Nebula, in the Large Magellanic Cloud, a nearby galaxy. Its neutrinos reached Earth about 3 hours ahead of the visible light. We're due for another one any day now, and when that happens, SNOOS should give you the opportunity to be among the first to witness something that no human has ever seen.
Relativity describes space and time as a kind of interconnected fabric for the universe. This means that what we know of as space and time exist only as part of the universe and not beyond it. Now, when everyday objects expand, they move out into more space. But if there is no such thing as space to expand into, what does expanding even mean? In 1929, Edwin Hubble's astronomy observations gave us a definitive answer. His survey of the night sky found all faraway galaxies recede or move away from the Earth. Moreover, the further the galaxy, the faster it recedes. How can we interpret this? Consider a loaf of raisin bread rising in the oven. The batter rises by the same amount between each and every raisin. If we think of raisins as a stand-in for galaxies and batter as the space between them, we can imagine that the stretching or expansion of intergalactic space will make the galaxies recede from each other. And for any galaxy, its faraway neighbours will receive a larger distance from the nearby one in the same amount of time. Sure enough, general relativity predicts a cosmic tug-of-war between gravity and expansion. It's only in the dark void between galaxies where expansion wins out and space stretches. So there's our answer. The universe is expanding unto itself. That said, cosmologists are pushing the limits of mathematical models to speculate on what, if anything, exists beyond our space-time. These aren't wild guesses, but hypotheses that tackle peaks in the scientific theory of the Big Bang. The Big Bang predicts matter to be distributed evenly across the universe as sparse gas, but then the galaxy comes peak. The inflationary model describes a brief era of incredibly rapid expansion. It relates quantum fluctuations in the energy of the early universe to the formation of clumps of gas that eventually led to the galaxy. If we accept this paradigm, it may also imply our universe represents one region in a greater cosmic reality that undergoes endless eternal inflation. We know nothing of this speculative inflated reality, save for the mathematical prediction that its endless expansion may be driven by an unstable quantum energy state. In many local regions, however, the energy may settle by random chance into a stable state, stopping inflation and forming bubble universes. Each bubble universe, ours being one of them, will be described by its own Big Bang and laws of physics. Our universe will be part of a greater multiverse in which the fantastic state of eternal inflation makes it impossible for us to encounter a neighbour universe. The Big Bang also predicts that in that early hot universe, our fundamental forces may unify into one superstar. Mathematical string theories suggest descriptions of this unification, in addition to a fundamental structure for subatomic quarks and electrons. In these proposed models, vibrating strings are the building blocks of energy. Competing models of strings have now been consolidated into a unified structure, and suggest these structures may interact with massive, higher dimensional surfaces called brains. Our universe may be contained within one such brain, floating in an unknown higher dimensional place, playfully named the bulk, or hyperspace. Other brains, containing other types of universes, may coexist in hyperspace, and neighbouring brains may even share certain fundamental forces like gravity. Both eternal inflation and brains describe a multiverse. But while universes in eternal inflation are isolated, brain universes could bump into each other. An echo of such a collision may appear in the cosmic microwave background, a soup of radiation throughout our universe that's a relic from the early Big Bang era. So far, though, we found no such cosmic echo. Some suspect these differing multiverse hypotheses may eventually coalesce into a common description, or be replaced by something else. As it stands now, they're speculative explorations of mathematical models. While these models are inspired and guided by many scientific experiments, there are very few objective experiments to directly test them yet. Until the next Edwin Hubble comes along, scientists will likely be left to argue about the elegance of their competing models, and continue to dream about what, if anything, lies beyond our universe. One of our favorite things about the TED-Ed community is our shared passion for big, sometimes unanswerable questions. Students in our TED-Ed Clubs program, for example, are using the TED platform to explore big questions like, would robots make good judges? Where does confidence come from? Why is between 8 and 18 years old share your research with TED. Visit ed.ted.com/clubs to get started.
Điêu vẽ nữa.
Is teleportation possible? Could a baseball transform into something like a radio, travel through buildings, bounce around corners, and change back into a baseball? Thanks to quantum mechanics, the answer might actually be yes. Sort of. Here's the trick. The baseball itself couldn't be sent by radio, but all the information about it could. In quantum physics, atoms and electrons are interpreted as a collection of distinct properties, for example, position, momentum, and intrinsic spin. The values of these properties are configured in a particle, giving it a quantum state identity. If two electrons have the same quantum state, they're identical. In a literal sense, our baseball is defined by a collective quantum state resulting from its many atoms. This quantum state information can be read in Boston and sent around the world. Atoms for the same chemical elements could have this information imprinted on them in Bangalore and be carefully directed to assemble, becoming the exact same baseball. There's a wrinkle though. Quantum states aren't so easy to measure. The uncertainty in quantum physics implies the position and momentum of a particle can't be measured at the same time. The simplest way to measure the exact position of an electron requires scattering a particle of light, a photon, from it, and collecting the light in a microscope. But that scattering changes the momentum of the electron in an unpredictable way. We lose all previous information about momentum. In a sense, quantum information is fragile. Measuring the information changes it. So how can we transmit something we're not permitted to do without destroying it? The answer can be found in the strange phenomena of quantum entanglement. Entanglement is an old mystery from the early days of quantum physics, and it's still not entirely understood. Entangling the spin of two electrons results in an influence that transcends distance. Measuring the spin of the first electron determines what spin we'll measure for the second, whether the two particles are a mile or a light year apart. Somehow, information about the first electron's quantum state, called a qubit of data, influences its partner without transmission across the intervening space. Einstein and his colleagues called this strange communication spooky action at a distance. While it does seem that entanglement between two particles helps transfer a qubit instantaneously across the space between them, there's a catch. This interaction must begin locally. The two electrons must be entangled in close proximity before one of them is transported to a new site. By itself, quantum entanglement isn't teleportation. To complete the teleport, we need a digital message to help interpret the qubit at the receiving end. 2 bits of data created by measuring the first particle. These digital bits must be transmitted by a classical channel that's limited by the speed of light, radio, microwaves, or perhaps fiber optics. When we measure a particle for this digital message, we destroy its quantum information, which means the baseball must disappear from Boston for it to teleport to Bangalore. Thanks to the uncertainty principle, teleportation transfers the information about the baseball between the two cities and never duplicates it. So in principle, we could teleport objects, even people. But at present, it seems unlikely we can measure the quantum states of the trillion or more atoms in large objects, and then recreate them elsewhere. The complexity of this task and the energy needed is astronomical. For now, we can reliably teleport single electrons and atoms.
which may lead to super secure data encryption for future quantum computers. The philosophical implications of quantum teleportation are subtle. A teleported object doesn't exactly transport across space like tangible matter, nor does it exactly transmit across space like intangible information. It seems to do a little of both. Quantum physics gives us a strange new vision for all the matter in our universe as collections of fragile information, and quantum teleportation reveals new ways to influence this fragility. And remember, never say never. In a little over a century, mankind has advanced from an uncertain new understanding of the behavior of electrons at the atomic scale to reliably teleporting them across a room. What new technical mastery of such phenomena might we have in 1,000 or even 10,000 years? Only time and space will tell.
Khô. Ướt đâu khô vãi lều. Nó có đổ mồ hôi nó mới ướt.
Our next speaker has spent his whole career eliciting that sense of wonder. Please welcome John Lloyd.
The question is, what is invisible? There's more of it than you think, actually. Everything, I would say, everything that matters, except everything, and except matter. We can see matter, but we can't see what's the matter. We can see the stars and the planets, but we can't see what holds them apart or what draws them together. With matter, as with people, we see only the skin of things. We can't see into the engine room. We can't see what makes people tick, at least not without difficulty. And the closer we look at anything, the more it disappears. In fact, if you look really closely at stuff, if you look at the basic substructure of matter, there isn't anything there. Electrons disappear in a kind of fuzz, and there is only energy. One of the interesting things about invisibility is that things that we can't see, we also can't understand. Gravity is one thing that we can't see, and which we don't understand. It's the least understood of all the four fundamental forces, and the weakest, and nobody really knows what it is or why it's there. For what it's worth, Sir Isaac Newton, the greatest scientist who ever lived, he thought Jesus came to Earth specifically to operate the levers of gravity. That's what he thought he was there for. So, bright guy, could be wrong on that one, I don't know. Consciousness. I see all your faces, I've no idea what any of you are thinking. Isn't that amazing? Isn't it incredible that we can't read each other's minds when we can touch each other, taste each other perhaps if we get close enough, but we can't read each other's minds. I find that quite astonishing. In the Sufi faith, this great Middle Eastern religion, which some claim is the root of all religions, Sufi masters are all telepaths, so they say, but their main exercise of telepathy is to send out powerful signals to the rest of us that doesn't exist. So that's why we don't think of this, the Sufi masters working on it. In the question of consciousness and artificial intelligence really, like the study of consciousness, got nowhere. We have no idea how to do it. Not only have they not created artificial intelligence, they haven't yet created artificial creativity. The laws of physics, invisible, eternal, omnipresent, all-powerful, remind you of anyone? Interesting. I'm, as you can guess, not a materialist, I'm an immaterialist, and I find a very useful new word, agnostic. Okay, I'm an agnostic. I refuse to be drawn on the question of whether God exists until somebody properly defines the term. Another thing we can't see is the human genome, and this is increasingly peculiar because about 20 years ago when they started delving into the genome, they thought it would probably contain around 100,000 genes. Every year since, it's been revised astounding. We now think we're likely to be only just on 20,000 genes in the human genome. This is extraordinary. Because rice, get this, rice is known at 38,000 genes. Potatoes have 48 chromosomes, 2 more than people, and the same as a gorilla. You can't see these things, but they are very strange. The stars by day, I always think that's fascinating. The universe disappears. The more light there is, the less you can see. Time. Nobody can see time. If you know this, modern physics is a big movement in modern physics that decides that time doesn't really exist, because it's too inconvenient for the figures. It's much easier if it's not really there. You can't see the future, obviously, and you can't see the past except in your memory. One of the interesting things about the past is you particularly can't see my son afterwards. They said, "Dad, can you remember what I was like when I was 2?" I said, "Yeah, you could write on that." Isn't that extraordinary? You cannot remember what happened to you only at the age of 2 or 3, which is great news for psychoanalysts, because otherwise they'd be out of a job, because that's where all the stuff happens. That makes you who you are.
Speed.
Another thing you can't see is the grid on which we hang. This is fascinating. You probably know, some of you, that cells are continually renewed. Skin flakes off, hairs grow, nails, that kind of stuff. But every cell in your body is replaced at some point. Taste buds every 10 days or so. Livers and internal organs will take a bit longer. Spine takes several years. But at the end of 7 years, not one cell in your body remains what was there 7 years ago. The question is, who then are we? What are we? What is this thing that we hang on, which is actually us? Atoms, can't see them, nobody ever will, small as the wavelength of light. Gas, can't see that, in fact it's similar to 1600 years ago. Gas was invented in 1600 by a Dutch chemist called Van Helmont, and it's said to be the most successful ever invention of a word by a known person. He also invented a word called glass. For meaning astral radiation. That's right, unfortunately. But well done him. Light. You can't see light. When it's dark in a vacuum, if a person shines a beam of light straight across your eyes, you won't see it. It's slightly technical, but disagree with it. But it's odd that you can't see the beam of light, you can only see what it is. Electricity, you can't see that. Don't let anyone tell you they understand electricity. They don't. Nobody knows what it is. You probably think the electrons in an electric wire move instantaneously down a wire, don't you, at the speed of light when you turn the light on? They
Fast.
don't. Electrons bumble down the wire about the speed of spreading honey, they say. Galaxies, 100 billion of them estimated in the universe. 100 billion. How many can we see? 5. 5 out of the 100 billion. 100 billion. How many can we see? 5. 5 out of the 100 billion galaxies with the naked eye, and one of them's quite difficult to see unless you've got very good eyesight. Radio waves, there's another thing. Heinrich Hertz, when he discovered radio waves in 1887, he called them radio waves because they radiated. Somebody said to him, "Well, what's the point of these, Heinrich? What's the point of these radio waves that you've found?" And he said, "Well, I've no idea. The biggest thing that's invisible to us is what we don't know. It is incredible how little we know." Thomas Edison once said, "We don't know 1% of 1 millionth about anything." And I've come to the conclusion. What's the point? What's another thing you can't see? What's the point? The point, what I've got it down to is there are only 2 questions really worth asking. Why are we here? And what should we do about it while we are? To help you, I've got 2 things to leave you with from 2 great philosophers, actually the greatest philosopher thinkers of the 20th century, one a mathematician and engineer, and the other a poet. First, Ludwig Wittgenstein. He said, "I don't know why we are here, but I'm pretty sure it's not in order to enjoy ourselves." He was a cheerful bastard, wasn't he? And secondly and lastly, W.H. Auden, one of my favourite poets, said, "We are here on earth to help others. What the others are here for, I've no idea."
Lo sợ. Học sớm thế sợ.
A few months ago, the Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded to two teams of astronomers for a discovery that has been hailed as one of the most important astronomical observations ever. And today, after briefly describing what they found, I'm going to tell you about a highly controversial framework for explaining their discovery, namely the possibility that way beyond Earth, Milky Way, and other distant galaxies, we may find that our universe is not the only universe, but is instead part of a vast complex of
Oh
universes.
shit, not this again. Not the multiverse. Give a shout.
What's the best country in the world to live in? Is it the one with the best food, the longest life expectancy, the best weather? For the past 70 years, most governments have relied heavily on a single number to answer that question. This number influences elections, the stock market, and government policy. But it was never intended for its current purpose, and some would argue that the world is addicted to making it grow forever. This number is called the gross domestic product, or GDP, and it was invented by the economist Simon Kuznets in the 1930s to try and gauge the size of an economy in a single, easy-to-understand number. GDP is the total monetary value of everything a country produces and sells on the market. To this day, GDP per capita, which is just the total GDP divided by the number of people living in that country, is widely seen as a measure of well-being. But GDP doesn't actually say anything direct about well-being, because it doesn't take into account what a country produces or who has access to it. $1 million of weapons contributes the exact same amount to a country's GDP as $1 million of vaccines or food. The value society derives from things like public schools or firefighters isn't counted in GDP at all, because those services aren't sold on the market. And if a country has a lot of wealth, but most of it is controlled by relatively few people, GDP per capita gives a distorted picture of how much money a typical person has. Despite all that, for a long time, higher GDP did correlate closely to a higher quality of life for people in many countries. From 1945 to 1970, as GDP doubled, tripled, or even quadrupled in some Western economies, people's wages often grew proportionally. By the 1980s, this changed. Countries continued to grow richer, but wages stopped keeping pace with GDP growth, or in some cases even declined, and most of the benefits went to an ever smaller percentage of the population. Still, the idea of capturing a nation's well-being in a single number had powerful appeal. In 1972, King Yingming Wanshu of Bhutan came up with the idea of gross national happiness as an alternative to gross domestic product. Gross national happiness is a metric that factors in matters like health, education, strong communities, and living standards, having citizens answer questions like, how happy do you think your family members are at the moment? What is your knowledge of names of plants and wild animals in your area? And what type of day was yesterday? The United Nations Human Development Index is a more widely used metric that takes into account health and education, as well as income per capita to estimate overall well-being. Meanwhile, a metric called the Sustainable Development Index factors in both well-being and the environmental burdens of economic growth, again boiling all this down to a single number. Though no country has been able to meet the basic needs of its people while also using resources fully sustainably, Costa Rica currently comes the closest. Over the past few decades, it's managed to grow its economy and improve living standards substantially without drastically increasing its emissions. Other countries like Colombia and Jordan have made notable progress. Costa Rica now has better well-being outcomes like life expectancy than some of the world's richest countries. Ultimately, there are limits to any approach that boils the quality of life in a country down to a single number. Increasingly, experts favor a dashboard approach that lays out all the factors a single number obscures. This approach makes even more sense given that people have different priorities, and the answer to which country is best to live in depends on who's asking the question. So what if that were you designing your country's well-being metric? What do you value, and what would you measure? To explore when and how more can become less, watch this video, or head to the World Economic Forum's YouTube channel for expert interviews on economics and current events.
Wow. Quên bật QTE con RC.
Most of us think of the sun as our friend. It helps plants grow, keeps us warm, and who doesn't love to lie on the beach on a sunny day? But for all of its good qualities, the sun can also be harmful in large amounts. That's why we invented sunscreen. The purpose of sunscreen is to shield the body from the sun's ultraviolet rays, which have several harmful effects including sunburn, aging, and skin cancer promotion. These rays are separated by their different wavelengths into types such as UVA and UVB, which exert a variety of effects in the skin due to the absorption patterns of the parts of the molecule responsible for color. The primary two forms are hemoglobin, found in our red blood cells, and melanin, which gives our skin tint. We know that UVB rays cause our skin to burn. The role of UVA rays is less well understood and appears to have an effect on our tanning response, carcinogenesis, and aging. So how does the sunscreen protect us from these rays? There are two basic types of sunscreen, physical and chemical blockers. Physical blockers like zinc oxide or titanium dioxide reflect the sun rays by acting as a physical barrier. If you've seen lifeguards with noses covered in white, then you know what's close. The same ingredients are primary components of aggregate, but their goal is also to create a physical barrier. Historically, they haven't always been easy to apply, and were conspicuously visible on the skin. But new formulations have made this less of an issue. Chemical blockers, on the other hand, absorb the sun rays. They deteriorate more quickly than physical sunscreen because their ability to absorb the sun is generally, these are more transparent when rubbed on the skin, but some people develop allergic reactions to some of the chemicals. Regardless of the type of sunscreen, all are subjected to testing to determine their sunburn detection factor, or SPF. This is essentially a measure of the protection that the sunscreen will provide from UVB rays before one begins to burn. But even if you don't burn, you still need to use sunscreen, because unless you live in a cave, you're not immune to the effects of the sun. It is true that darker-skinned people and those who tan easily have more built-in protection from sunburn, but they are still vulnerable to the effects of UVA. Children under the age of 6 months, on the other hand, should have almost no sun exposure, as their protective mechanisms are not fully functioning, and their skin is more likely to absorb any sunscreen that is applied. Wearing sunscreen helps protect against the development of all three types of skin cancer: basal cell carcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma, and melanoma. On a daily basis, the DNA in your cells is developing mutations and errors that are generally handled by machinery within your cells. But ultraviolet rays from the sun lead to mutations that the cell may not be able to overcome, leading to uncontrolled growth and eventual skin cancer. The scariest thing about this is that usually you can't even see it happening until it's but if these concrete risks here account for not enough to convince you to use sunscreen, there are aesthetic reasons as well. Along with cigarette smoking, sun damage is the leading cause of aging. Photoaging from chronic sun exposure leads to a loss of elasticity in the skin. In other words, making it look sad. Take a look at this truck driver whose left side is chronically exposed to the sun and notice the difference. This is an important point. Car windows block UVB, burn rays, but not UVA, aging rays. It is recommended to use sunscreen daily, but you should pay special attention before prolonged sun exposure, or when at the beach, or among snow, since the reflectivity of water and ice amplifies the sun's rays. For these cases, apply about an hour, 15 to 30 minutes before you go out, and once again soon after you get outside. After that, you should reapply it every 2 to 3 hours, especially after swimming or sweating. Otherwise, you should wear protective clothing with ultraviolet protection, or UPF. Stay in shaded areas such as under trees or umbrellas, and avoid the sun at the peak hours of 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And what's the best kind of sunscreen? Everyone will have their preference, but look for the following things: broad spectrum, SPF is at least 30, and waterproof. A light moisturizer with SPF 30 should be good for daily use. Take note if you decide to use a spray, as they take several coats to effectively cover your skin, like painting a wall with a spray can versus a paintbrush. So, enjoy the sun, but enjoy it with sunscreen.
Má đẹp. Đắt quá.
Would mathematics exist if people didn't? Since ancient times, mankind has hotly debated whether mathematics was discovered or invented. Did we create mathematical concepts to help us understand the universe around us? Or is math the native language of the universe itself, existing whether we find its truths or not? Are numbers, polygons, and equations truly real, or merely ethereal representations of some theoretical ideal? The independent reality of math has some ancient advocates. The Pythagoreans of 5th century Greece believed numbers were both living entities and universal principles. They called the number 1 the monad, the generator of all other numbers and source of all creation. Numbers were active agents in nature. Plato argued mathematical concepts were concrete and as real as the universe itself, regardless of our knowledge about it. Euclid, the father of geometry, believed nature itself was the physical manifestation of mathematical laws. Others argue that while numbers may or may not exist physically, mathematical statements definitely don't. Their truth values are based on rules that humans created.
Được bạn.
Mathematics is thus an invented
Rất
logical
hào hán.
with no existence outside mankind's conscious thought, a language of abstract relationships based on patterns discerned by brains, built to use those patterns to invent useful but artificial order from chaos. One proponent of this sort of idea was Leopold Kronecker, a professor of mathematics in 19th century Germany. His belief is summed up in his famous statement: God created the natural numbers. All else is the work of man. During mathematician David Hilbert's lifetime, there was a push to establish mathematics as a logical construct. Hilbert attempted to axiomatize all of mathematics, as Euclid had done with geometry. He and others who attempted this saw mathematics as a deeply philosophical game, but a game nonetheless. Henri Poincaré, one of the fathers of non-Euclidean geometry, believed that the existence of non-Euclidean geometry, dealing with the non-flat surfaces of hyperbolic and elliptic curvatures, proved that Euclidean geometry, the long-standing geometry of flat surfaces, was not a universal truth, but rather one outcome of using one particular set of variables. But in 1960, Nobel Physics laureate Eugene Wigner coined the phrase the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics, pushing strongly for the idea that mathematics is real and discovered by it. Wigner pointed out that many purely mathematical theories developed in a vacuum, often with no view towards describing any physical phenomena, have proven decades or even centuries later to be the framework necessary to explain how the universe has been working all along. For instance, the number theory of British mathematician Godfrey Hardy, who had boasted that none of his work would ever be found useful in describing any phenomena in the real world, helped establish cryptography. Another piece of his purely theoretical work became known as the Hardy-Weinberg law in genetics and won a Nobel Prize. And Fibonacci stumbled upon his famous sequence while looking at the growth of an idealized rabbit population. Mankind later found the sequence everywhere in nature, from sunflower seeds and flower petal arrangements to the structure of a pineapple, even the branching of bronchi in the lungs. Or there's the non-Euclidean work of Bernhard Riemann in the 1850s, which Einstein used in the model for general relativity a century later. Here's an even bigger thing. Mathematical knot theory, first developed around 1771 to describe the geometry of position, was used in the late 20th century to explain how DNA unravels itself during the replication process. It may even provide key explanations for string theory. Some of the most influential mathematicians and scientists of all of human history have chimed in on the issue as well, often in surprising ways. So, is mathematics an invention or a discovery? Artificial construct or universal truth? Human product or natural, possibly divine creation? These questions are so deep, the debate often becomes spiritual in nature. The answer might depend on the specific concept being looked at, but it can all feel like a distorted Zen koan. If there's a number of trees in a forest, but no one's there to count them, does that number exist?
Vãi. Đánh đều. Hào hán.
What does the French Revolution have to do with the time NASA accidentally crashed a $200 million orbiter into the surface of Mars? Actually, everything. That crash happened due to an error in converting between two measurement systems, US customary units and their SI or metric equivalents. So what's the connection to the French Revolution? Let's explain. For the majority of recorded human history, units like the weight of a grain or the length of a hand weren't exact and varied from place to place. And different regions didn't just use varying measurements, they had completely different number systems as well. By the late Middle Ages, the Hindu-Arabic decimal system mostly replaced Roman numerals and fractions in Europe. But efforts by scholars like John Wilkins to promote standard decimal-based measures were less successful. With 250,000 different units in France alone, any widespread change would require massive disruption. And in 1789, that disruption came. The leaders of the French Revolution didn't just overthrow the monarchy. They sought to completely transform society according to the rational principles of the Enlightenment. When the new government took power, the Academy of Sciences convened to reform the system of measurements. Old standards based on arbitrary authority or local traditions were replaced with mathematical and natural relationships. For example, the meter, from the Greek word for measure, was defined as 1/10,000,000th between the equator and North Pole. And the new metric system was, in the words of the Marquis de Condorcet, for all people, for all time. Standardizing measurements had political advantages for the revolutionaries as well. Nobles could no longer manipulate local units to extract more rent from commoners, while the government could collect taxes more efficiently. And switching to a new republican calendar with 10-day weeks reduced church power by eliminating Sundays. Adoption of this new system wasn't easy. In fact, it was a bit of a mess. At first, people used new units alongside old ones, and the republican calendar was eventually abandoned. When Napoleon Bonaparte took power, he allowed small businesses to use traditional measurements, redefined in metric terms. But the metric system remained standard for formal use, and it spread across the continent along with France's borders. While Napoleon's empire lasted 8 years, its legacy endured far longer. Some European countries reverted to old measurements upon independence. Others realized the value of standardization in an age of international trade. After Portugal and the Netherlands switched to metric voluntarily, other nations followed, with colonial empires spreading the system around the world. As France's main rival, Britain had resisted revolutionary ideas and retained its traditional units. But over the next 2 centuries, the British Empire slowly transitioned, first approving the metric system as an optional alternative before gradually making it official. However, this switch came too late for 13 former colonies that had already gained independence. The United States of America stuck with the English units of its colonial past, and today remains one of only 3 countries which haven't fully embraced the metric system. Despite constant initiatives for metrication, many Americans consider units like feet and pounds more intuitive. And ironically, some regard the once revolutionary metric system as a symbol of global conformity. Nevertheless, the metric system is almost universally used in science and medicine, and it continues to evolve according to its original principles. For a long time, standard units were actually defined by carefully maintained physical prototypes, but thanks to improving technology and precision, these objects with limited access and unreliable longevity are now being replaced with standards based on universal constants, like the speed of light.
Má con này clear quá nhanh vẫn được.
Measurements are such an integral part of our daily lives that it's hard to appreciate what a major accomplishment for humanity they've been. And just as it arose from a political revolution, the metric system remains crucial for the scientific revolutions to come. European nations, the English Channel has long been one of the world's most important maritime bastions. Yet for most of its history, the Channel's rocky shores and stormy weather made crossing a dangerous prospect. Engineers of the early 1800s proposed numerous plans for spanning the 33-kilometer gap. Their designs included artificial islands linked by bridges, submerged tubes suspended from floating platforms,
Lời sao né con này
and
khó
an
vậy?
underwater passage more than twice the length of any existing tunnel. By the end of the century, this last proposal had captured European imagination. The invention of the tunnel boring machine and the discovery of a stable layer of chalk marble below the seabed made this fantastic tunnel more feasible. But the project's most urgent obstacles were ones no engineer could solve. At the time, Britons viewed their geographic isolation as a strategic advantage, and fears about French invasion shut down plans for the tunnel. The rise of aerial warfare rendered these worries obsolete, but new economic concerns arose to replace them. Finally, 100 years after the initial excavation, the two countries reached an agreement. The tunnel would proceed with private financing. In 1985, a group of French and British companies invested the modern equivalent of £14 billion, making the tunnel the most expensive infrastructure project to date. The design called for 3 separate tunnels, one for trains to France, one for trains to England, and one service tunnel between them. Alongside crossover chambers, emergency passages, and air ducts, this amounted to over 200 kilometers of tunnels. In 1988, workers began excavating from both sides, planning to meet in the middle. Early surveys of the French coast revealed the site was full of fault lines. These small cracks let water seep into the rock, so engineers had to develop waterproof boring machines. The British anticipated drier conditions and forged ahead with regular borers. But only months into the work, water flooded in through undetected fissures. To drill in this wet chalk, the British had to use grout to seal the cracks created in the borer's wake, and even work ahead of the main borer to reinforce the chalk about to be drilled. With these obstacles behind them, both teams began drilling at full speed. Boring machines weighing up to 1,300 tons drilled at nearly 3.5 meters per hour. As they dug, they installed lining rings to stabilize the tunnel behind them, making way for support weapons following each machine. Even at top speed, work had to proceed carefully. The chalk layer followed a winding path between unstable rock and clay, punctured by over 100 boring holes made by previous surveyors. Furthermore, both teams had to constantly check their coordinates to ensure they were on track to meet within 2 centimeters of each other. To maintain this delicate trajectory, the borers employed satellite positioning systems, as well as paleontologists who used excavated fossils to confirm they were at the right depth. During construction, the project employed over 13,000 people and cost the lives of 10 workers. But after 2.5 years of tunneling, the two sides finally made contact. British worker Graham Fagg emerged on the French side, becoming the first human to cross the channel by land since the Ice Age. There was still work to be done, from installing crossover chambers and pumping stations to laying over 100 miles of tracks, cables, and sensors. But on May 6, 1994, an opening ceremony marked the tunnel's completion. Full public service began 16 months later, with trains for passengers and rail shuttles for cars and trucks. Today, the Channel Tunnel services over 20 million passengers a year, transporting riders across the channel in just 35 minutes. Unfortunately, not everyone has the privilege of making this trip legally. Thousands of refugees have tried to enter Britain through the tunnel in sometimes fatal attempts. These tragedies have transformed the tunnel's southern entrance into an ongoing site of conflict. Hopefully, the structure's history can serve as a reminder that humanity is at their best when breaking down barriers. Fissures, leaks, and cracks were a major obstacle in the construction of the English Channel Tunnel. That could heal itself. It's not science fiction. It's a mind-boggling material that could change the future of engineering. Learn more with this video, or stay on track and explore the London Underground.
The universe is incredibly big and seems full of potential for life, with billions of habitable planets. If an advanced civilization had the technology to travel between the stars at just 0.1% of the speed of light, it could colonize our galaxy in roughly 100 million years. Which is not that long given the billions of years the Milky Way has existed. So, in principle, any spacefaring civilization should be able to spread rapidly over huge sectors of the galaxy. And yet, we see nothing, hear nothing. The universe seems empty, devoid of others. This is the Fermi paradox, which we've discussed in more detail in other videos. Confronted with the seemingly empty universe, humanity faces a dilemma. We desperately want to know if we are alone in the Milky Way. We want to call out and reveal ourselves to anyone watching, but that could be the last thing we ever do. Because maybe the universe is not empty. Maybe it's full of civilizations, but they are hiding from each other. Maybe the civilizations that attracted attention in the past were wiped away by invisible arrows. This is the dark forest solution to the Fermi paradox.
Là van có cháy đâu mà. Giờ cầm S rồi nó còn có cháy thì cái này đánh cháy mà.
The hunter awakes in his hiding place and carefully listens for suspicious noises from the thick undergrowth before he gets up. Another night has passed without incident. The forest is dark and full of fog. He considers calling out to others to end his loneliness, but stops himself at the last moment. What if they are like him? All living things seek to survive, secure resources, and multiply. Their greatest obstacle are other living things that share the same objective. Competition between species favored the survival of beings with advantageous traits. Our ancestors were inventive, competitive, expansionist, and greedy for resources, which led them to winning the competition for our planet. Today, most other animals are so utterly at our mercy that we wipe out about a dozen species a day, just as an unintentional byproduct of how we like to run things. But humans are more than individuals. From us, cultures emerge that also compete with each other. Competitive and expansionary cultures spread faster and further and merge with, subdue, or destroy others. If we look at our history, it becomes clear we are dangerous. Not just to others, but also to ourselves. Our human nature has driven us to take over every corner of our planet, and soon we will look to the stars both to expand our domain and ensure access to ever more resources. And then we might stumble upon others trying to do the same thing. it's likely that the competition of life also takes place on faraway planets. So it's logical to assume that an alien civilization that came to dominate their planet would be in some regards similar to us. But if they're similar to us, they too may be dangerous. The implication. As the hunter sneaks through the dark forest all alone, he knows that there might be others like him. He can't know their intentions, if they are aggressive or not. The hunter knows he would kill to ensure his own survival, so he has to assume that they would too. And it might be that if he stumbles upon another hunter, the one that shoots first survives. None of this means that conflict is unavoidable. So far, the progress of the modern world seems to have made us more peaceful, not more violent. Maybe this is true for other civilizations too, that eventually progress means less conflict, not more. Different alien civilizations also should vary from the mild and peaceful to the malevolent and militaristic. The existential problem we're facing is that when we meet others between the stars, we have no way of telling who is peaceful or aggressive and what their true intentions are. Similarly, they might not understand or trust our intentions even if we tell them that we are peaceful. On top of that, if we did discover another civilization and they discovered us, the light years between us would mean years of communication delay. Both sides would be in a state of uncertainty, wondering if the wisest move is to just attack, because there's another serious issue, technological explosions and the first strike advantage. We don't know where the limits of technology are, but we do know how much technological progress matters in war. A few hundred or thousand years can turn conflict with uncertain results into a one-sided massacre. Caesar's legions would stand no chance against Napoleon's army with their cannons and muskets, which would be eradicated by artillery from the First World War, which would not stand a chance against today's drones and guided missiles. So the power level of different civilizations may vary massively, and even if not, between the time it takes us to detect another civilization and us saying hi, we might already be hopelessly behind on the tech tree. Which is bad enough, but the nature of interstellar conflict makes this worse. If your opponent is light years away, sending an invasion fleet takes so long that by the time it arrives, it might be hopelessly obsolete. So war between civilizations might be just about eliminating the other to remove an existential threat to yourself. Someone else who might be so scared of you that they attack the first chance they get. In this environment, the only way to guarantee a win is to strike with such force and speed that the target has no chance of survival or time to counterattack or escape to seek revenge later. The stakes are the highest possible, with no room for error. If we assume that the majority of civilizations live on planets, that leaves them pretty vulnerable. All you need to do is throw something massive at a planet to make it uninhabitable.
Damn.
So the ultimate interplanetary annihilation weapon is probably something like a relativistic kill vehicle, a missile shot at a planet at a significant fraction of the speed of light. For example, a missile the size of a person going 95% the speed of light has as much energy as all nuclear bombs on Earth. If you shot a few dozen at the civilization you wanted to wipe out, success would be fairly certain, even a single hit would suffice. This is not that absurd of an idea. A civilization only slightly above us on the Kardashev scale would have enough energy to send multiple strikes against every planet it suspects of harboring life. What makes these weapons so sinister is how much they favor a first strike, since they would be so fast that it might be impossible to protect yourself effectively against them once they're launched. Conflict between civilizations may not be lengthy affairs, but rapid winner-takes-all situations, where the first one to shoot wins. This makes any civilization an existential threat to any other. And if every civilization is an existential threat to every other, there may be only two kinds of civilizations out there. Quiet ones and dead ones. So, what should we do? Should we worry? It's unlikely that anybody has noticed humanity yet. The radio signals we've transmitted in the last 100 years traveled a relatively tiny distance and have long decayed into unreadable noise. At our technological stage, if we don't actively try to get noticed, and if nobody specifically looks at our pretty unremarkable solar system, we'll stay hidden. But one day we will venture into space in a serious way and need to consider these kinds of questions again. We don't know if there are others or if we are going through the forest alone. But we have no way of knowing for sure. For the time being, it seems the best we can do is to carefully listen. And even if we see others step into a clearing and make themselves known, we should not reply right away, but carefully watch them from the undergrowth. Perhaps we are also thinking about this all wrong by allowing our primitive brain that evolved in the context of the gruesome competition of life to conjure fears of predatory aliens all around us. Maybe the fact that we are looking at the universe like this is a sign that we are not grown up yet as a species. There could be a friendly, welcoming community of alien civilizations waiting to hear from us when we are ready. As for now, the good news is there is actually little we need to do. We just need to be thoughtful about the signals we send out into the galaxy. We need to watch the sky and learn more about our galaxy and our forest. Because whatever the nature of our forest is, full of dangers or friends, or nobody at all, only careful observation can tell. So, let's do that. At last, the hunter reaches a clearing and finds a comfortable position. Slowly, the sun melts the fog away. Lost in thought, he admires the vegetation until suddenly he is eye to eye with another hunter.
Thôi sủi thôi, lần nào cũng đánh xong rồi. Mà đánh boss này sủi trước.